The sun was a hammer, and the world was an anvil. Clara had stopped feeling the individual cuts on the soles of her feet miles back. Now it was just a flat, hot pain. A dull burning that matched the fire in her empty stomach and the raw scrape of her throat. She walked on baked dirt and shattered rock. A ghost moving through a shimmering afternoon. The town, when it finally appeared, was hardly worth the effort. It looked like a handful of rotted teeth set in a dry, gaping mouth. Dry bone, that's what the last sign, half buried in a dune of grit, had called it. It was a fitting name. The buildings were unpainted, their siding warped and peeling like sunburnt skin. A long, empty main street shimmered with heat. Nothing moved, save a curtain of dust dancing in front of the saloon. Clara pulled the tattered edges of her shawl tighter, though there was no cold. It was a habit from a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. She was a hollow thing, a vessel for hunger and shame. Her dress, once a respectable gray calico, was torn at the hem and bleached by the sun, hanging on her gaunt frame. Her hair, the color of dead wheat, was matted with alkali dust. In her right hand, she clutched a small, faded pouch. The drawstring was looped tight around her fingers. Inside was the last piece of her old life, the last piece of her, period. She tasted the dust on her lips and forced her legs to move. One foot, then the other. The hot ground, the pain, the hunger. As she stepped onto the broken boardwalk, a sound stopped her, the lazy creak of a chair. From the shaded porch of the Mercantile, two men watched. They sat tilted back, boots up on the railing, chewing tobacco. They didn't speak, they just watched. Their eyes were flat, assessing, like men looking at worn-out livestock. Clara lowered her gaze to the boardwalk. She could feel their judgment. It was another layer of dust, another weight to carry. She saw a woman come out of the Mercantile, a woman with a clean apron and a basket on her arm. The woman saw Clara, and her mouth tightened. She pulled her skirts in, as if Clara's poverty might be catching, and hurried on. A lone woman, unaccompanied, no husband, no father, no child. In this world, that meant one of two things, a whore or a burden. Clara was neither, and somehow that was worse. She was just nothing, a mistake. The whispers started, though she could not hear the words. She saw them. A man at the livery pointed with his chin. The blacksmith, a mountain of a man with arms blacked by soot, paused his hammer. The town was dead, but it was not asleep. It was watching her. She was looking for a sign. Not the saloon, not the Mercantile. She had nothing to trade at those places but the one thing she would rather die than sell. She needed something else. There, tucked between the gunsmith and a boarded-up laundry, a small, fly-specked window. A fading sign painted on the glass. Hesh, assay timepieces. Her hand tightened on the pouch. Her knuckles were white. This was it. This was the last step down. She was about to sell her past, her name, the very proof that she had ever been a wife and not just a stray, for a piece of bread. She took a breath. The air was fire. She pushed the door open. A small bell tinkled, a cheerful sound in a place that held no cheer. The shop was a narrow, dark room that smelled of oil, metal, and old. Dry paper. A glass counter ran along one wall, filled with a few tarnished pocket watches and some chipped turquoise jewelry. Behind it sat a man so old he seemed made of the same dust as the street. He had a jeweler's loupe screwed into one eye and was bent over the guts of a watch. He did not look up. Clara stood there, her shadow pooling at her bare feet. She waited. The silence in the shop was louder than the sun outside. "Well?" the old man grunted, his voice like gravel. He still didn't look up. "I ain't buying memories, and I ain't giving charity. What is it?" Clara's voice was a stranger to her. It came out as a dry croak. "Sir, I have something to trade." "Trade for what?" Everybody wants to trade. Nobody wants to buy. He finally lifted his head, and the loop in his eye made him look like a one-eyed insect. He took in her tattered dress, her bare feet, the desperation clinging to her. His gaze was sharp and without pity. Food, she whispered. Just some bread, dried meat, whatever you think is fair. He grunted again. Let's see it. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely work the drawstring. The faded velvet pouch was soft and worn. She tipped it. The ring landed on the dark wood of the counter with a small, heavy sound. It was a simple gold band. It was not fancy. It was not adorned with stones. It was just a circle of worn, heavy gold. The kind a man buys when he means it to last forever. The jeweler, Mr. Hesh, picked it up. He squinted at it, first with his good eye, then with the loupe. He turned it over. He pulled a small scale from under the counter and weighed it. He scratched it on a dark stone and dropped a bit of acid on the scratch. Clara watched him, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She felt naked. He was weighing her entire life. Her marriage, the home she had tried to build, the 2 babies she had buried, the man who had walked out one morning for firewood and never come back. All of it was being weighed on a brass scale. It's gold, Mr. Hesh said, as if accusing it of something. 18 karat, worn thin in spots. Please, Clara whispered. I can give you store credit at the mercantile, he said, ignoring her. Not cash, credit. They'll take my voucher. How much? She asked, her throat closing. $5. $5. For a life, for a soul. It was enough for bread and meat. It was enough to live for another week. Long enough to find another town, another dusty shop, another thing to sell. Yes, she said. All right, thank you. Mr. Hesh reached for a pad of paper to write the voucher. The bell on the door tinkled. Neither of them looked. Clara was focused on the paper. Hesh was focused on his inkwell. A man's voice, low and calm, filled the small room. It's worth 10. Clara flinched. Hesh froze, his pen hovering. Across the street, Silas had been watching the town die for a week. He sat on a bench in the shade of the livery, his back against the rough wood, his hat tipped low. He was just passing through, waiting for a letter that would probably never come. He saw the woman arrive. He saw her the way a man who has lived in the wild sees things, not in pieces, but all at once. He saw the bare feet. He saw the tattered calico. He saw the way she held her hand, clutched tight. He saw the men on the mercantile porch, and he saw the way their eyes followed her, the lazy, hungry way they looked at anything weak. He'd seen women like her before. He'd seen them in Kansas, in the mining camps, in the aftermath of raids. They were the flotsam of the frontier, the pieces left behind when the men moved on or died. He watched her stop at the jeweler's. He knew, with a certainty that settled in his gut like cold coffee, what she was doing. He'd stayed out of it. It was not his business. He had a lifetime of staying out of other people's business. He lived by a simple code: ride your own horse, clean your own gun, and don't get tangled. But he watched her go inside, and he thought of his sister, Ilara. He thought of her hands, worn raw from lye soap. He thought of the man she married, a smooth-talking drummer who left her with 2 children and a pile of debts in a sod house in Nebraska. He thought of the letter he got, 6 months too late, telling him she'd been found frozen, her children with her. He stood up. The bench creaked. He crossed the street. His spurs made no sound. He didn't wear them in town. His boots were old, the leather scarred, but the heels were sound. He moved with a quiet, deliberate pace, a man who was in no hurry and afraid of nothing. He stepped into the shop, the smell of oil, the little old man, the woman. She was worse up close. She was thin enough to break. Her hands, resting on the counter, were raw and blistered. And on that counter was the ring. He heard the offer. $5. That's when he spoke. It's worth 10. Clara turned. The man was tall. He filled the doorway, blocking the harsh white light of the street. He was a silhouette, dark and broad-shouldered. He wore a canvas duster, coated in the pale dust of the trail. His hat was low, shadowing his face, but she could see a square jaw and a mouth that was not smiling. He looked hard. He looked like the land itself, unforgiving and worn down to the bone. Mr. Hesh scowled. This is private business. Mr. I'm making it public, Silas said. He stepped forward, into the gloom. Clara could see his eyes now. They were gray, like a winter sky, and they held no pity. They just saw. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $10 gold piece. He spun it on the counter. It glittered in the dim light. I'll buy it, Silas said to Hesh. $10. Hesh's eyes darted from the coin to Silas's face, then to Clara. He snatched the coin. Sold! Clara's mind was screaming. No, this was worse. This was 100 times worse. To be a charity case for a gruff old man was one thing. To be a spectacle for this stranger, this cowboy, he had bought her ring. Silas picked up the small gold band. He looked at it for a moment, resting in his large, scarred palm. Then he turned to Clara. She backed away, hitting the wall. I don't... He didn't speak. He stepped toward her, slow. He reached out and took her left hand. His grip was not rough, but it was firm. It was a grip that would not be denied. Her hand was filthy, her knuckles scraped, and then, gently, he slid the ring back onto her finger. It was cold. It burned. Clara stared at it, the gold band on her dirty hand, the hand of a tall, hard-looking stranger still resting on hers. A hot, terrible shame flooded her, so powerful it threatened to choke her. It was mockery. He was playing with her, a rich cowboy amusing himself at the town tramp's expense. She ripped her hand away. No! Her voice was a shriek. She clawed at the ring, but her fingers were swollen and clumsy. What do you think you're doing? Take it back! I don't want it! She threw herself at him, beating at his chest with her small, weak fists. It was like hitting a stone wall. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there and let her. Are you laughing at me? She sobbed, the tears finally coming, cutting clean tracks through the grime on her face. Is this a joke? To buy it and give it back? To show me how low I am? I am not a game for you. She collapsed against him, her strength gone. He didn't put his arms around her. He just stood solid, a bulwark. He waited until her sobs quieted to ragged, painful breaths. Then he spoke, his voice so low she almost didn't hear it. You shouldn't have to sell your past just to eat. She froze. She leaned back, her hands still on his chest, and looked up at his face. The light from the window caught his eyes. There was no mockery there, no pity, no humor. There was just a deep, abiding sadness, a weariness that matched her own. He wasn't playing with her. He meant it. The words, they were simple. They were true. And they broke the last thin wire holding her together. The darkness that had been simmering at the edge of her vision all day surged. The smell of oil and dust faded. The hard-muscled chest under her hands dissolved. The floorboards rushed up to meet her. Silas caught her before she hit the floor. He lifted her. She weighed no more than a child. He cradled her against his chest, her head lolling on his shoulder. Mister. Hesh looked on, his pen still in his hand. Well, I'll be, he muttered. You gonna take the ring back? Silas looked at the old man. It was not a friendly look. I paid for it. It's hers. He turned and carried her out of the shop, back into the brutal, blinding sun. The men on the mercantile porch sat up straight. The blacksmith stepped out into the street. The woman with the clean apron was there, and she gasped. Silas ignored them. He walked down the center of the street, his steps even and unhurried, carrying the unconscious woman as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He walked straight to the livery. He didn't have a room at the hotel. He had a cot in the back of the livery, a small, windowless space by the tack room that smelled of hay, leather, and horse. It was where he'd been sleeping for a week. He laid her down on his own bedroll. It was rough wool, but it was clean. He pulled a folded blanket over her. He sat on an upturned bucket for a long time, just watching her breathe. She was like a starved bird, her breath shallow and fluttering. Her face, even in the grime, was hollowed out by hunger. He got up. He went to the saloon and spoke to the woman who ran the kitchen. He came back with a tin cup of water and a bowl of thin beef stew. He sat on the bucket and waited. Clara woke to the smell of hay. Her first thought was that she was dead. Her second was that she was in a barn. She was lying on something soft. She was covered. She was not hot. She opened her eyes. The room was dark, lit only by a sliver of light from under the door. A figure sat in the corner. She scrambled up, a cry of panic in her throat. "Easy," the man's voice said. The same low, calm voice from the shop. He didn't move toward her. He pushed the tin cup toward her. "Water." She stared at it. Her throat was sandpaper. She lunged for it, grabbing the cup in both hands and drinking so fast she choked. He waited. When she was done, she held the cup to her chest, breathing hard. He pushed the bowl forward. "Stu, go slow." She looked at the bowl, then at him. His face was in shadow, but she could see the outline of his hat. He was just sitting there, watching. I don't have any money," she whispered, her voice raw. "I ain't asking for any," he said. "Eat." She ate. She tried to be ladylike, to use the bent spoon he'd given her, but her body betrayed her. She ate like an animal, gulping the warm, thin broth and the small pieces of tough meat. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. When it was gone, she set the bowl down. The strength from the food was already spreading through her, a warm, dangerous feeling. It gave her the energy to be afraid. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice hard. He was quiet for a long moment. He seemed to be cleaning a piece of leather, rubbing it with an oiled cloth. "Nothing," he said. "Nobody does nothing for nothing." She spat, the old, bitter wisdom of her life returning. "You paid $10 for that ring. You fed me. What's the price?" He stopped rubbing the leather. He looked at her, and though it was dark, she felt his eyes. "The price is you eat the stew, you drink the water, you get your legs back under you, and then you go where you're going." And the ring, she touched it. It was still on her finger. "I told you, it's yours. I just paid the debt on it." She didn't understand. This man made no sense. He had not touched her. He had not spoken a single cruel word. He had given her food and water and asked for nothing. It was a trick. It had to be. "I'll leave," she said. "I can leave right now." "Town's asleep," he said. "Storm's kicking up. You sleep, leave in the morning." He gestured to the bedroll. "I'll be in the stable." He stood up. He was taller than she'd thought. He filled the whole space. He walked out the door, closing it gently behind him. Clara sat in the dark, her mind racing. She slept. She had to sleep. She lay down on the bedroll. It smelled like him, like dust and leather, and something else, something clean, like soap. She fell into a black, heavy sleep, the sleep of the exhausted. When she woke again, it was to silence. The sliver of light under the door was gone. It was pitch black, night. He was gone. She sat up. Her body ached, but the stew was working in her. She had a little strength. He'd told her to wait until morning, but in the morning, the debt would be bigger. In the morning, he would be back, and he would expect, what, a thank you, a smile? She knew what men expected. She had to run. She stood up, her legs wobbly. She felt her way to the door. Her bare feet made no sound on the dirt floor. She eased the door open. The stable was empty. A horse shifted in its stall, a soft, snorting sound. The big front doors were barred. She slipped out the small side door. The town was dead. The moon was a pale scar, hidden by a racing, bruised-looking sky. The air was wrong. It was heavy, and it tasted of grit. A low, moaning sound started. The wind. Clara pulled her shawl tight. She looked back at the livery. He had been kind, but kindness was a currency she couldn't afford. She turned and ran. She made it to the edge of town, past the last dark-windowed house. The open prairie was in front of her, a vast, black ocean. She just had to get across. Then the wind hit. It was not a wind. It was a wall, a solid, screaming wall of dirt and sand that picked her up and threw her down. The world vanished. There was no sky, no ground, no town. Only the roaring blackness and the sting of a million tiny needles. She screamed, but the sound was stolen from her mouth. She covered her face, choking. The grit was in her nose, her lungs, Her eyes. She tried to crawl. She got turned around. Which way was the town? Which way was safety? She was blind. She was lost. She stumbled over something, a rock, a dead bush, and fell hard. The wind tearing at her. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in a bed, not with a husband, but alone in the dirt, scoured from the earth by a wind that didn't even know her name. She curled into a ball, her hands over her head, and gave up. She didn't know how long she lay there. It could have been minutes or an hour. The world was just noise and pain. Then, a new shape appeared in the chaos. It was not a shadow. It was a solid thing. A man, bent low against the storm. He was there, right above her. He had a kerchief tied over his face. He saw her. She tried to say something, but her mouth was full of mud. Silas had known she would run. He'd seen the look in her eyes, the trapped, animal look. He'd given her an hour. Then he'd gone to check. The bedroll was empty. He'd felt the wind kick up. He cursed, low and steady. He grabbed his duster and the kerchief. He found her tracks by the side door, already blurring. He followed her, not like a hunter, but like a guardian. He was 20 yards behind her when the storm hit. He saw her go down. He reached her, a dark shape in a world of dark shapes. He didn't speak. There was no point. The wind would steal the words. He bent down, hooked one arm under her legs, the other under her back, and lifted. He pulled her against his chest, wrapped the edges of his duster around her, and turned his back to the wind. Clara felt herself being lifted. She felt the solid, warm wall of his body. She smelled the leather and the dust. She was too weak to fight. She buried her face in his chest, clinging to the rough canvas of his coat. He began to walk. He didn't go back to the town. The town was behind them, and the wind was at his back. He was heading out, into the storm. He walked for what felt like an eternity, each step a battle. He was a rock, moving through the chaos. Clara held on, her eyes shut, and felt the steady, strong beat of his heart against her ear. Finally, he stopped. She felt him shove something, a loud scraping sound. The wind's howl lessened. They were inside. He set her down, not on the ground, but on a pile of something dry. It smelled of old hay. She heard him fighting with the door, the sound of a heavy bar being dropped into place. The screaming of the wind dropped to a low, frustrated moan outside the walls. It was dark, pitch black. Clara coughed, a dry, racking sound that hurt her chest. She heard him move, a scrape of a match, a small, yellow flame sputtered. He lit a rusted, broken lantern he must have had stashed there. It cast a weak, oily light. They were in a small shed, an old line shack or a cattle shelter. The walls were rough-hewn, and the roof was full of holes, but it was standing. He stood by the door, his duster covered in a thick layer of pale dust. He looked like a statue. He pulled the kerchief from his face. Clara was huddled on a pile of old, dry straw in the corner. She was trembling, covered in a paste of mud and sweat. They stared at each other in the weak, flickering light. The storm howled outside, a beast trying to get in. They were trapped, together. The world outside the shed did not stop screaming. It was a high, thin wail that clawed at the walls, shoving grit through 100 invisible cracks. The old wood groaned. Clara sat on the pile of dry straw, her knees drawn to her chest, trembling. The man, Silas, had barred the door, and the sound of the heavy timber slotting into place had felt as final as a coffin lid. He moved with a quiet economy, wasting no motion. In the oily, weak light of the lantern, she watched him. He seemed unbothered by the end of the world. He unstrapped a bedroll from his saddle, which he'd dragged inside. From his saddlebags, he pulled a small, dented coffee pot, a tin of grounds, and a canvas bag. He inspected the shed, his gray eyes scanning the corners, the roof. He found a few broken boards in the corner, part of a collapsed stall. He took a hatchet from his saddle and, with short, precise strokes, began splitting them into kindling. The sound was sharp, a counter-rhythm to the wind. "Cold's coming," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't shout over the storm. He just spoke, and the sound of his voice seemed to cut through it. He found a spot against the leeward wall, cleared the dirt floor, and ringed it with a few large stones that had likely been used for the same purpose before. He laid the fire, struck a match, and shielded the tiny flame with his body. It caught, sputtered, and then a small, smoky fire began to climb. It was a miserable fire. But it was fire. It was light. It was warmth. He didn't speak to her again. He took the coffee pot, filled it with water from his canteen, added grounds, and set it on the stones by the fire. He sat back on his heels, watching the flames. Clara watched him. He was a man of the trail. That was plain. He was prepared, but he hadn't gone back to the livery. He hadn't left her. He had carried her out here, into the storm, to his own ground. This was his land. She realized. This derelict shed was on the edge of his property. The coffee began to smell, rich and dark, cutting through the smell of dust and old manure. He poured a steaming black liquid into a tin cup and held it out to her. She flinched, her eyes going wide. He stopped. He set the cup on the ground, a foot from her, and slid it closer. "It's just coffee," he said. She stared at the cup. She looked at him. He had no weapon in his hand. His duster was open, and she could see the plain suspenders on his dark shirt. He was just sitting by his fire. Slowly, she reached for the cup. It was hot, scalding her fingers. But she didn't care. She held it in both hands, letting the heat sink into her. She drank. It was bitter and strong, and it felt like life. He pulled a strip of dried meat from his canvas bag and tossed it gently onto her lap. "Eat." They sat like that for hours. The light in the shed turned from the oily yellow of the lantern to the smoky orange of the fire. Outside, the storm shrieked. It was not a night storm. It was a world storm. It had no intention of stopping. When the gray light of morning came, it was not light at all. It was just a lessening of the dark. The wind had not died. If anything, it was worse. A constant, deafening roar. They were cut off. The town of Drybone, the world itself, was gone, buried under a moving sky of dirt. Silas rose, checked the door, and then took a bucket and went to the horse he'd tied in the most sheltered corner. He spoke to it in a low murmur, rubbing its neck. He gave it water from a small barrel. He was a man who took care of his things. Clara watched. She felt like a piece of his equipment, something he had salvaged and brought to shelter, like his saddle or his horse. The day passed, then the night, then another day. The world shrank to the four walls of the shed. It was the fire, the howl of the wind, and the quiet presence of the man. He never pressed her. He never asked her name. He never asked where she was going, or where she had come from. He handed her food. He kept the fire going. He sat for hours, cleaning his saddle tack, his hands busy, his face thoughtful. The silence was a strange thing. With other men, silence was a threat. It was the prelude to a demand, or to violence. With Silas, the silence was a space. It was a shelter, just like the shed. On the third morning, the wind was still high, but the note had changed. It was no longer a scream, but a deep, throbbing moan. It was colder. Silas was mending a strap, his head bent, the firelight catching the lines of his face. He looked older than she had first thought, not in years, but in wear. He had the same worn-down, essential look as the land around them. Clara looked down at her own hand. The gold ring was still there. It was clean now. He had left a bar of soap and a bucket of water for her, and she had scrubbed the grime from her skin. The ring looked alien on her thin, clean finger. Her voice, when it came, was as dry as the straw. "He bought it in St. Louis." Silas's hand stilled. He did not look up, but she knew he was listening. Every part of him was listening. "Jeb, my husband, he bought it. He said it was forever." She laughed. The sound was a small, broken thing. Forever lasted. Well, it lasted. She hadn't meant to speak, but the words were there, choking her. The quiet kindness of this man was more unbearable than a beating. It demanded something. It demanded the truth. "I was 17, she said, her voice flat, talking to the fire. "My PA. He liked mules. Jeb had 2 good mules and a silver inlaid saddle. So, Pa sold me. He called it a marriage." Silas set the leather strap down. He looked at her. His gray eyes were deep, and they held her. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched. "He wasn't," she whispered. "A kind man. He liked to show me who owned me. This." She touched a faint, pale scar near her temple, hidden by her hair. "Was for burning the biscuits." The confession was a torrent. Now, it poured out of her, the poison of years. "I lost 2 babies. The ground was too hard to dig. The first one, he hit me. The second, I don't know. I was just so tired." Tears ran down her face. She didn't bother to wipe them. They were hot, and they felt clean. And then he left. This last winter. The snow was high. He said he was going for wood. He never came back. She looked up, her eyes meeting his, bright with unshed tears. "He took the good rifle and the last of the flour. He left me the ring." She finished. The shed was silent, save for the wind. The terrible, ugly facts of her life hung in the air between them. She expected him to look away, to grunt, to say something cruel or pitying. Silas held her gaze for a long moment. There was a pain in his eyes that had nothing to do with her. It was an old pain, something that recognized her own. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "That's a hard thing." He just nodded, once, a slow, deliberate movement. Then he picked up the coffee pot, poured her a fresh cup, and handed it to her. His hand brushed hers. His skin was rough, calloused, and warm. The air had changed. The confession had settled the dust between them. They were no longer just a man and a woman. They were 2 people, scarred and broken, but people. Their intimacy grew in the small spaces. It was in the long silences, when he would be mending his gear and she would be staring into the fire, and the quiet felt shared, not empty. It was in the stolen glances. She would watch him. She studied the way his hands worked, strong and careful. She watched the lines around his eyes. She wondered what he had seen to make his eyes so old. He watched her, too. When she was asleep on the straw pile, he would look at her, his face a mask of something she could not name. He saw the hollows in her cheeks starting to fill, the raw terror in her eyes fading to a wary caution. It was in the brief, accidental touches. His fingers brushing hers as he passed her the tin plate, her shoulder brushing his arm as she moved to add a piece of kindling to the fire. Each touch was a small explosion. It was charged with a need so deep and so buried. Neither of them knew what to do with it. She was starved, not just for food, but for a touch that was not a blow or a demand. He was a man who lived by holding himself back, and she could feel the immense, coiled restraint in him. The storm died on the 4th night. The wind stopped, and the silence was shocking. It was a cold, pure silence that pressed in on the shed. The fire had burned low. It was the coldest night yet, a deep, penetrating cold that came from the ground up. Clara was wrapped in her thin shawl, huddled on the straw. But it wasn't enough. She began to shiver. It was a small, uncontrollable tremor at first, but it grew. Her teeth chattered. Her whole body shook. She heard Silas move. He was on his feet, a dark shape against the dying red embers. She tensed, a knot of old fear in her stomach. He came over. He didn't speak. He lay down on the straw behind her, a long, solid line. He pulled his own wool bedroll over them both, creating a cocoon. Clara went rigid. Her breath caught in her chest. This was it. This was the payment. This was what men did. He shifted, and his arm came around her waist. He pulled her back, fitting her against his body. Her back was pressed to his chest. Her head was tucked under his chin. She could feel his heart, a slow, steady beat against her shoulder blade. She could feel the heat coming off him, a powerful, living warmth. She waited. She waited for his hand to move, to grab, to demand, but it didn't. His hand rested on her waist, large and heavy, but still, his breathing was deep and even. He was just there, a wall against the cold. The shaking began to subside. The warmth from his body seeped into her bones. It was a warmth she had never felt. It was not the heat of lust or the heat of anger. It was just heat, shelter, slowly, muscle by muscle. She let herself relax. She leaned back into him, a fraction of an inch. He shifted, his arm tightening just enough to hold her secure. "Better," he murmured, his voice a vibration against her hair. "Yes," she whispered. She didn't pull away. She lay there, held by a stranger, and for the first time in her entire life, she felt safe. She fell asleep, not to the sound of the wind, but to the sound of his breathing. The line between comfort and temptation is a thin one, as thin as a shadow. In the close, cold dark of the shed, it blurred, and then it vanished. She woke to the feeling of his breath on her neck. They were still tangled. The shed was gray with the first weak light of dawn. The world was utterly still. His arm was still around her. His body was still pressed to hers. The heat was no longer just comfort. It was something else. It was a deep, aching awareness. She was aware of the rough wool of his shirt against her cheek. She was aware of the solid muscle of his legs against hers. She stirred, and his eyes opened. He was looking at her. His face was only inches from hers. The gray eyes were no longer sad or old. They were dark, and they were full of a raw, quiet hunger that mirrored her own. He didn't move. He just looked at him, as if asking a question. She should have pulled away. She should have scrambled back to the safety of the far wall. But she didn't. She was held by his gaze. Slowly, his other hand came up. He traced the line of her jaw, his thumb rough against her skin. He brushed the hair from her face. His touch was so gentle, it made her want to weep. "Clara," he said. He had not used her name before. He had not known it. "He said it," she whispered. "The jeweler, he called me Mrs. Rayner. Clara." "Clara," he said again, as if tasting the word. He was going to kiss her. She saw it in his eyes. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her mouth, and she wanted it. She wanted it with a fierceness that terrified her. She wanted this man, who had been kind. She wanted this man, who had seen her broken and had not turned away. She wanted to know what this was, this feeling that was not fear. She lifted her chin. She closed her eyes. His lips were almost on hers. Shame. It hit her like a physical blow. A cold, black wave of it. Who was she? A ruined woman. A sold woman. A piece of damaged goods. What right did she have to this? To a gentle touch? To a kind man? No? She tore herself away, scrambling backward until her back hit the cold, rough wall of the shed. She was breathing in gasps, pulling her shawl tight as if it could hide her. Silas sat up. He didn't reach for her. He stayed on the bedroll, his body taut. He was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists at his side. He looked at her, his face dark, his eyes unreadable. I can't," she sobbed, the tears coming hot and fast. "I'm sorry, I can't." "It's all right," he said, his voice rough. "No, it's not," she cried, the words torn from her. "You don't understand. I don't know. I don't know how to do this." She waved her hand at the space between them. "I don't know what love is. I don't know what kindness is. I only know what men want. They've only ever wanted my body, to use, to take." She was weeping openly now, the ugly, painful truth of her life. "They take, and they leave, and I am not what a good man would want." She looked down at her hands. "I'm not clean." Silas watched her. He ran a hand over his face, his jaw tight. He looked at the dead fire, then at the gray light. He took a long, deep breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. It was soft, but it had a core of steel. "I'm not trying to own what ain't mine," he said. Clara looked up, her tears stopping. He met her gaze. "I'm just offering shelter, for as long as you want it." He stood up, retrieved his hat, and settled it on his head. He walked to the door, his back to her. He lifted the heavy bar, and a sliver of cold, clean, post-storm light flooded the shed. He stood in the doorway for a moment, a tall, dark silhouette, before stepping outside, leaving her alone with his words. The storm broke as if a string had been cut. The sound just stopped. After 4 days of relentless, screaming wind, the silence was a physical weight, heavier and more profound than the noise had been. Clara woke in the shed, her heart pounding, thinking she had gone deaf. Silas was already at the door, pulling the heavy bar. The cold, clean light of a new dawn sliced into the small, dark space. The air that flowed in was sharp, scoured, and so cold it hurt to breathe. It smelled of wet rock and ozone. He stood in the doorway, a dark shape against the impossibly bright, clean world. He looked out over the land for a long minute. "It's over," he said. He looked back at her. She was still huddled in the straw, wrapped in his bedroll. "We can go." He saddled his horse, his movements economical and precise. He packed his few things. He offered her his hand and pulled her to her feet. She was weak, her legs unsteady. He didn't offer her the horse. He just nodded his head. "It's not far. The walk will do you good. Get the blood moving." They walked out of the shed. The land was washed clean. The sky was a high, aching blue, scraped raw by the wind. The ground was damp. The dust settled, but the land itself was brutal. It was all rock and thorn and scorched grass. There was no softness to it. He led the way, his horse's reins in his hand. Clara followed. She looked back once at the town of Drybone, a cluster of small, dark shapes miles away in the valley below. It looked like a handful of old bones, just as its name suggested. They walked for perhaps an hour, climbing a gentle, rocky rise. There was no path. Silas moved as if he were following an invisible map. Then she saw it, tucked against a high-walled fold in the rock, as if hiding from the wind, was a cabin. It was not a home. It was a shelter, and only just. It was made of rough-hewn timber, chinked with mud that had been blasted by 1,000 storms. The roof was sod, and a thin plume of smoke was already rising from the stone chimney. He must have left a fire banked. Beside it was a small, leaning stable and a corral made of sun-bleached poles. The land around it was the same as all the rest, scorched, rocky, and unforgiving. This was his homestead. This was the place he had carried her to. He led the horse to the stable, uncinched the saddle, and gestured to the cabin. "Go on in, the pot's on." Clara stood at the door. It was unlocked. She pushed it open. The inside was one room. It was dark, but it was clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A rough plank table and 2 benches stood in the center. A cot with a bedroll was in one corner. In another, a dry sink with a water bucket and a tin basin. It was a soldier's room. It held nothing soft, nothing that was not essential. But it was warm, and it smelled of coffee. She stood in the middle of the floor, feeling as out of place as a songbird in a hawk's nest. She was a woman in a space that had forgotten what a woman was. Silas came in, his saddlebags over his shoulder. He didn't look at her. He went to the fire, took the pot, and poured 2 cups of coffee. He pushed one across the table to her. "Sit," he said. She sat. He sat opposite her. The silence stretched. Clara held the warm cup in her hands. The ring on her finger glinted in the firelight. "I will not be a burden," she said, her voice small. He looked up. His gray eyes met hers. "I ain't asked you to be." I will work," she said more strongly. "I can cook. I can clean. I will earn my keep, mister." She faltered. She did not even know his name. "Silas is enough," he said. "And I don't keep hired help." "I am not," she said, her spine stiffening. "Hired help. I am paying a debt. You fed me. You sheltered me." He looked at her for a long time. She saw the quiet respect in his eyes. He wasn't looking at her as a man looks at a woman he desires, or a man looks at a creature he pities. He was looking at her as a man looks at another person. He nodded once. There's a broom by the door. Flour and beans are in the bin. It was an acceptance. It was permission. The next few days, Clara worked. She worked with a desperate, frantic energy. She was not just cleaning a cabin. She was scrubbing the shame from her own soul. She swept the floor. She took the 2 blankets from his cot and hung them in the sharp, clean sunlight, beating the dust from them until her arms ached. She took the bar of lye soap and scrubbed the table, the benches, the floor by the hearth. She went to the stable. His horse, a big dark roan, watched her with wary intelligence. Silas was out, riding the fence line, checking the damage from the storm. "Hello," she whispered to the horse. She found a curry comb. She began to groom the animal, her motions gentle, then firm. She talked to it. She told it about the weather, about the feel of the water from the pump. The horse leaned into her touch. She cooked. The supplies were simple: beans, salt pork, cornmeal, coffee. She made a pot of beans that simmered all day. She made cornbread in a heavy skillet. When Silas came in that night, he stopped. He was covered in dust, his face hard from the wind. He stopped and he looked around. The cabin was clean. The floor was swept. The fire was bright, and it smelled of cornbread. Clara stood by the fire, her hands twisted in the rough apron she had made from a piece of canvas. She was terrified. She had overstepped. She had taken his space and made it different. He hung his hat on the peg. He went to the basin and washed his face, the water splashing. He sat at the table. "Smells good," he said. She served him. They ate. He had 2 helpings of the bread. He watched her, his respect quiet but solid. He saw a woman who was not broken, but bent, and who was fighting to stand up straight. The next day, she set about ordering his things. He had few possessions, a few shirts, a change of pants, all folded in a small, rough-hewn bureau. She opened a drawer to put a mended shirt away. It stuck. She pulled it harder. It came loose. Behind it, in the dark recess of the bureau, was a small, wooden box. She shouldn't have. She knew it. It was his. It was private. But she was a woman who had lived with a man of secrets, and she knew that secrets were weapons. Her fingers trembled. She pulled the box out. It was not locked. She lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of dark velvet, was a tarnished badge. It was not a sheriff's star. It was a simple, heavy silver disc that said, "U. Sam, Deputy Marshal." Beneath it were papers. She unfolded the first one. It was a wanted poster. The face was hard. A man with cold, dead eyes. Wanted. Jebediah Stone. For the murder of his wife. Martha Stone. By strangulation. She unfolded another. Wanted. Silas Croft. For brutality against his common-law wife. And another. Wanted. Cole Younger. For crimes against the family of... Her blood went cold. She sat on the floor. The papers spread around her. These were not bank robbers. These were not cattle rustlers. These were men who hurt women, men who had beaten, or killed, or abandoned. She thought of the jeweler's shop, the men on the porch, the way Silas had looked at them, the way he had looked at her. He was a bounty hunter. He was a hunter of men just like her husband. She put the things back. She slid the box into its hiding place. She pushed the drawer shut. Her hands were ice. All day, she felt the weight of that box. She scrubbed the floor again, her hands raw, trying to scrub the knowledge away. He was not just a quiet cowboy. He was a man who hunted monsters. He came in at dusk. He knew the instant he saw her. She was standing by the fire, but she was not cooking. She was just standing, rigid. "You found it," he said. It was not a question. She turned. Her face was pale, her eyes huge and dark. "Who are you, Silas?" He hung his hat. He did not go to the basin. He came to the table and sat down. He motioned for her to sit. She did. He stared into the fire, his hands clasped on the table. "I had a sister," he said. His voice was flat. A piece of dead wood. Her name was Alara. She was bright. She liked yellow ribbons. She married a man from back east, a drummer, name of Harris. He had a quick smile. He stopped. He seemed to be listening to the fire. I was on a long drive. Texas to Kansas. Gone 8 months. I got letters from her. At first, they were long, full of nonsense. Then they got shorter. The writing was shaky. She said she'd fallen. She said she was clumsy. He closed his eyes. When I got back to Nebraska, I rode to her sod house. I was 6 months too late. The neighbors told me. He'd been drinking. He used his fists. He'd used a harness strap. She died. The child died with her. Clara put a hand to her mouth. A small, choked sound. The law, Silas said, and his voice was full of acid. Said it was a private matter, a domestic dispute. Said Harris had cleared out, and it was probably for the best. He opened his eyes. They were not gray. They were black, and they were full of a pain so deep it was bottomless. So I got the law. He tapped his chest. I became the law. I got a badge. And I hunted him. I hunted him for 4 months. I found him in a saloon in Leadville, and I settled the matter. He looked at her. And after that, I just kept going. I hunted men like him, men who the law wouldn't touch, men who hide behind a marriage license to do their dirt. He looked at the posters she had not seen, the ones still in the box. Men like your Jeb. The pain in his voice. It was not anger. It was guilt. It was a raw, gaping, permanent wound. Clara trembled. It was not from fear. It was from recognition. She looked at this hard man, this killer, this hunter, and she saw herself. He was carrying a guilt as heavy as her shame. His failure to save Ilara was a brand on his soul, just as Jeb's hands had been a brand on her. They were two halves of the same broken thing. She died, Clara whispered. Because you weren't there. I lived, because he left. Their shared wounds, his guilt, her shame, drew a new line between them. It was a rope, pulling them close. The air in the cabin was thick with it. A few days passed. The tension in the cabin was a living thing. It was not the tension of fear, but of awareness. Every time they brushed past each other, the air crackled. Every time their eyes met, a volume was spoken. One morning, she was at the fire, pouring coffee. He came up behind her. He did not touch her, but she felt his heat at her back. Clara, he said, his voice low. She turned, the coffee pot in her hand. She meant to hand him a cup. He was looking at her. His eyes were not the eyes of a hunter. They were the eyes of a man, raw and needful, and so tired. She didn't know she was going to do it. The impulse was a flash fire. She set the pot down. She stood on her toes. She put her hands on his shoulders, and she pressed her mouth to his. It was soft. It was hesitant. It was a question. Then, just as quickly, she pulled back, horrified. The old shame washed over her. I'm sorry, she stammered, backing away. He caught her. His hands shot out and gripped her upper arms. He did not hurt her. He just held her. He stopped her from running. He held her there, his face inches from hers, and he was trembling. This powerful, quiet, dangerous man was trembling. His hands, his shoulders, his breath was coming in short, hard bursts. His eyes were closed. He was fighting a war. I want you, Clara, he whispered, and his voice was a ragged tear. God help me, I want you more than my next breath. He opened his eyes. They were dark with a desperate, held-back desire. But not like this. His voice was strained, a wire pulled taut. Not if you think you have to, not as payment for a bowl of stew, not for gratitude, not because I told you about my sister. His grip on her arms was tight, but his face was agonized. I will not be another man who takes from you. He let her go. He stepped back, putting a foot of space between them. He turned, grabbed his hat from the peg, and was gone. The door slammed shut, leaving Clara alone in the cabin, her lips still burning, her body shaking. He had given her the choice. He had given her the power. He had seen her kiss, her fear, her shame, and he had handed the choice right back to her. She did not see him for the rest of the day. She saw him from the window, miles out, mending a fence line with a furious energy. Clara's mind was a storm. He wanted her, but he would not take her. She thought of Jeb, who had taken and taken and taken and never asked, who had seen her as a piece of property, a thing to be used. She looked at Silas, a dark speck in the distance, a man who had seen her at her lowest, her dirtiest, her most broken, a man who had hunted monsters, and in doing so, had become one. In his own mind, a man who was trembling with the need to hold her, but who respected her enough to walk away. That night, she waited. The cabin was dark. The fire was banked, a bed of red-orange embers. The moon was high, and it sent a pale, silver light through the single window. Silas was on his cot. He lay on his back, his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. He was not asleep. He was waiting. Clara was on her own pallet, a bed of straw and blankets she had made by the fire. She was wearing a thin linen chemise. It was old, mended, and soft from 1,000 washings. She had found it in the bottom of the bureau. She suspected it had been Alara's. The silence was absolute. She knew what she wanted. It was not gratitude. It was not payment. It was a choice. She stood up. The floorboards were cold under her bare feet. She walked across the small, dark room. The moonlight fell on her, outlining her thin form in silver. Silas did not move, but his breathing stopped. She stopped at the foot of his cot. He watched her. His eyes were shadows, but she could feel the heat from them. She did not speak. She held out her hand. For a moment, he did not move. Then, slowly, he lifted his own hand and took hers. His grip was warm, strong, and calloused. He did not pull. He did not demand. He just held her hand. She stepped forward, and she sat on the edge of his cot. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her palm. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of reverence. "Clara," he whispered. "Are you sure?" "I am not," she whispered back. "Paying a debt." He sat up, and he framed her face with his hands. He looked at her, and in the dim light, she saw the tears in his eyes. "You are not ruined," he said, his voice thick. "You are not unclean. You are the strongest thing I have ever known." He kissed her. It was slow. It was breathless. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss of their morning, but something deeper. It was a promise. He undid the simple ties of her chemise. He touched her shoulders, his hands careful. He kissed the scar on her temple. He kissed the hollow of her throat. Every touch was a question. Every look was permission. She wept. The tears came silently. Not for sadness, but for a release so profound it had no other name. She was being touched as if she were sacred, as if she were precious. He laid her back on the cot, his body covering hers, his weight a comfort, not a threat. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice a low growl. She opened her eyes. His face was above hers, intense, adoring, his. "You are mine, Clara," he said. "Not by law, not by force, by choice, by my choice. And you are mine." She wept, her hands coming up to grip his hair, his strong neck. "By my choice." It was a tangle of reverence and desire. It was the tears of his guilt and the tears of her shame, washing each other clean. It was slow, and it was deep, and it was a healing. It was two broken, jagged pieces, finding a way to fit. It was not gentle. It was intense. It was a desperate, breathless claiming, a stake driven into the hard, unforgiving ground. Later, in the deep dark of the moon-shadowed room, she lay curled against him. His arm was heavy over her waist. His breathing was deep. She was not in the shed. She was not on the trail. She was not in Jeb's cold, angry house. She was home. The morning after was not a morning of words. It was a morning of small, quiet motions. Clara woke first, tangled in his arms, the thin chemise a whisper against her skin. She lay still, breathing in the scent of him. It was leather and soap and the clean, male scent of his skin. He was asleep, his face in repose. The hard lines softened. The hunter was gone, In his place was just a man. A deep, profound tenderness washed over her, so powerful it ached. She felt a fierce, animalistic urge to protect him. She slid from the cot, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. She pulled on the canvas apron and went to the hearth. She built the fire, her motions practiced and sure. She made coffee. When he woke, the cabin was warm, and the smell of coffee was in the air. He sat up, the bedroll pooling at his waist. He watched her. He said nothing, but his eyes, those gray, steady eyes, followed her. She brought him a cup. Her hand was steady. She was not ashamed. "Good morning," she said, her voice quiet. "Morning," he rumbled, and the world began anew. She began to dream. It was a dangerous, fragile thing, a seed planted in scorched earth, but it grew. She began to see the homestead not as a shelter, but as a place. She watched Silas work. She watched the way his hands, which had been so reverent on her body, could fix a broken harness, or set a loose stone, or handle an axe. She worked alongside him. She did not just cook. She learned to mend the fence. She learned to pump water for the horse without tiring. She learned the silence of the land, the way the hawks hunted, the way the wind spoke of the weather. In the cabin, she made changes. She found an old crate and, with his knife, scraped it clean and made a small shelf for the tin plates. She took the linen chemise, the one she had worn, and 2 others she found, and she cut them. She stitched them together, her fingers clumsy but determined, until she had a curtain for the single, glass-paned window. He watched her do it. He sat at the table, cleaning his pistol, and he watched the curtain go up. It was a small thing, a scrap of old cloth, but it turned the room from a box into a home. It was a woman's touch. It was Alara's touch. When she was done, he said nothing. He just got up, came to her, and put his hand on the back of her neck, his thumb stroking the skin. He kissed her temple. The shame was not gone. It was a deep, old scar that would always be part of her. But it no longer ruled her. When he touched her now, she did not flinch. She did not see Jeb's hands. She saw Silas. The nights were a quiet revelation. He taught her, without words, that her body was not a thing for taking. It was a thing for pleasure. He was a patient, tender lover, and he was a fierce one. He learned the map of her, and he taught her the map of him. They were 2 scarred, solitary people, building a new world in the dark. She began to think of the spring. She found a patch of softer earth behind the cabin. She thought of a garden. She thought of planting. Something, anything. She began to dream of staying. The dream shattered on a Tuesday. They were running low on coffee and salt. Silas had put it off. He didn't like leaving her, but it was necessary. "I'm riding to Drybone," he said at breakfast. "We need supplies." Clara's stomach went cold. "I can go." "No." His voice was flat. Not a suggestion. A fact. "You stay here. You keep the door barred. You don't open it for any man. Not for Hesh, not for a preacher. No one." He touched the small pistol he'd given her, which now rested on the mantel. "You know how to use it, Silas." "Bar the door," he said, softer. He kissed her. "I'll be back before dark." She watched him ride out, a tall, solid man on a dark horse, until he was just a speck, and then he was gone. The silence of the cabin pressed in on her. It was the first time she had been alone, truly alone, since the storm, and the silence was full of fear. Silas rode into Drybone. The town was just as he'd left it, a collection of tired, gray buildings, except for one. The old, boarded-up laundry was open. The windows were uncovered. A new, garish sign, painted yellow and red, was nailed over the door. The Golden Spur. It said, "Laughter." Loud and rough, spilled out onto the street, even at 10 in the morning. Silas kept his eyes forward. He saw new horses at the hitching rail, horses that were ridden hard, with the rifle scabbards and heavy saddlebags. He tied his roan in front of the mercantile. He walked past 2 men lounging on the porch of the new saloon. They were not from here. They had the hard, watchful eyes of men who lived by the gun. They watched him pass. He went into the mercantile. Old man Hesh was there. talking to the owner, a thin, nervous man named Peters. "Silas," Peters said, his voice a little too high. "Good to see you. Storm treated you. All right?" "It did," Silas said. He gave Peters his list. "Coffee, salt, a bag of flour, and cartridges. 44. New saloon's bringing in a lot of coin." Hesh grunted from his perch on a barrel. "New coin, bad coin." "They're a rough crowd," Peters whispered, scooping coffee beans into a bag. "Came in right after the storm. Some outfit from up in the territory. Call themselves the Rayner Gang." Silas's hand, which was resting on the counter, did not move, but his whole body went still. "Rayner? That's the name," Hesh said. "Heard 'em talking. Their boss ain't here yet, but he's coming. Seems they're looking for someone." A drifter, a man in rags who had been sweeping the floor for a shot of whiskey, leaned on his broom. "I know him," he slurred, his eyes bright with the need to be important. "I seen him up near Cheyenne. That's Jeb Rayner's outfit. Meanest man God ever let live. I heard he's looking for his wife." Silas turned his head. Slow. He looked at the drifter. "His wife?" "Yes, sir," the drifter said, encouraged. "Ran off on him. I heard, took something of his. He's coming down this way. Heard he's going to reclaim what's his." The drifter grinned, showing broken, yellow teeth, and kill any man who's touched her. He's meaner than ever, angry. Says he's going to skin the man who. "That's enough," Silas said. His voice was not loud. It was as flat and cold as a winter stone. The drifter flinched, the words dying in his throat. Hesh and Peters stared. Silas's eyes were gray ice. He took his bags. He paid. He walked out of the mercantile. The two men on the saloon porch watched him. He untied his roan, his movements deliberate. He did not look at them. He mounted, and he rode out of town. He did not ride fast. He rode slow and straight, and he looked at no one. He rode back to the cabin, the world in sharp, painful focus. The sky was too blue, the rocks were too sharp, and the woman in his cabin was a ghost. Clara had the door unbarred before he was off his horse. She had seen him coming. She ran to him, her face alight with a relief so profound it made his next words feel like a betrayal. "You're back," she breathed, her hands on his arms. "Get inside," he said, his voice. It was the voice from the shed, the voice of the hunter. She backed away, the light dying from her face. She went inside. He followed, the supplies in his arms. He dropped them on the table. He stood in the middle of the room, his hat still on, his duster still on. He was a stranger. "Silas," she whispered, her hand at her throat. "What is it? What's wrong?" "They opened a new saloon in town." "A saloon?" Her relief was palpable. That's all?" "It's run by a gang from up north," he said, his eyes on her. "An outfit. They call themselves the Rayner Gang." The name hung in the air. Clara's face did not just go pale. It went dead. The blood, the life, the light, all of it vanished. She was the woman from the trail. She was the gaunt, starved, terrified creature he had first seen. "No," she whispered. It's a common name." "Jeb Rayner," Silas said, the words like bullets. "He's coming. He's looking for his wife. He's telling folks he's going to reclaim. What's his—" Clara backed away until she hit the wall she had scrubbed, the wall where the curtain hung. She slid down it, her legs giving way, until she was huddled on the floor. "He'll kill you," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. He's not a man. He's a monster. He'll kill you. He'll kill you for that." She pointed a trembling finger at the cot. "Clara," Silas said, taking a step toward her. "No," she shrieked, scrambling up. "No, he won't kill you, because I won't be here." She was all animal panic. She ran to the peg where her old, tattered dress still hung. She had kept it, as a reminder. She tore the canvas apron off. "Clara, stop. He won't find me," she babbled. her hands shaking so hard she couldn't work the buttons of her clean dress. I'll go south. I'll draw them away. He only wants me. He won't hurt you if I'm gone. He won't. Stop, Silas said, his voice a low command. You don't understand, she screamed at him, her face a mask of terror. He'll kill you. He'll beat you. And I won't. I won't be the reason. He saw it then. It was not just fear for herself. It was not even, he realized, mostly fear for herself. It was fear for him. She thought she was a curse. She thought she was the thing that would bring death to his door. And she was going to run, back into the wilderness, back to starvation, to save him. The realization broke his heart. He let her talk. He let her panic. He watched her. That night, she was a different woman. She was not the lover from the night before. She was quiet. She was tense. She made dinner, but she didn't eat. Her eyes kept darting to the door, to the window, to the pistol on the mantel. He knew what she was planning. He went to the cot. He lay down. He turned his back to the room. He breathed, deep and even. He faked the sleep of a tired man. He waited. It was hours. The fire burned down to red embers. The cabin was filled with a deep, moonlit dark. He heard it, the faint, barefoot sound on the floor. She was moving. He heard her take a small canvas bag. He heard the metallic scrape of the water skin. She was taking food. She was taking water. She was leaving. He heard her pause at the door. She was looking at him. He could feel her eyes on his back. He felt her say goodbye. He heard the latch, a faint, wooden click. He was on his feet before the door was open an inch. He did not light a lamp. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He was there, a shadow in the shadows, blocking the doorway. She gasped, a tiny, terrified sound, and lunged for the opening. He caught her. His hand closed on her arm. And where do you think you're going? His voice was not the hunter's. It was the voice of a man who had his heart ripped out. Let me go, she hissed, trying to tear her arm from his grip. Let me go. Silas, I'm saving you. Saving me? By doing this? By running? He was furious, and he was heartbroken. You think I'm him? You think I'm some weak, whiskey-soaked fool you can run from? He'll kill you, she cried, her voice breaking. He's a madman. I can't watch you die. So you'd rather I watch you walk out, back to what? To starvation? To him? He grabbed her other arm, his grip just short of painful. He shook her. Once. Don't you see you're mine now? The word, she froze. Her whole body went rigid, her eyes, wide and luminous in the dark, stared at him. Mine? She whispered. He saw it. He saw her face. He had used the word of the owner, the word of the abuser. He had used Jeb's word. No. He let her go, his hands dropping, as if burned. He raked his hair. Not like that. Not by force. He was trembling. Clara, not by law, by choice. My choice. He jabbed a finger at his own chest. My choice, and your choice. You chose this. You chose to stay. You chose to. He pointed at the cot. I'm unchoosing, she screamed, the tears finally coming. She shoved him, her 2 small hands, flat against his chest. I am choosing to save you. I will not be your Alara. I will not be the woman you failed to save. The name hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back. She saw the look on his face, and she knew she had gone too far, but she was too desperate to stop. You think you're strong? She spat, shoving him again. You're not. You're just a man, and he's an animal. He'll gut you, and I... She was beating at his chest now, her fists hitting his solid, unmoving torso. Let me go. Let me go. He took the blows. He stood there, a stone in the dark, and he let her hit him. He let her pour out all the fear, all the anger, all the terror, and then, as it always did, her strength failed. The blows became weaker. The sobs took over. She was not a fighter. She was just a woman, terrified of a past that would not let her go. She collapsed. She fell against him, her forehead pressed to his chest, her hands clutching his shirt. Please, Silas, she wept. Please, don't let him kill you. Just let me go. It's the only way." He wrapped his arms around her. He held her. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe. He buried his face in her hair. "No," he whispered, and his voice was a vow. It was a promise made of iron and stone. "This is not that. I am not him. And you are not Alara. You're right. You're not her." He tilted her face up, his hands gentle now. "I failed her. I will not fail you." He kissed her. It was not a kiss of love. It was a kiss of war. It was hard, and it was desperate, and it was a promise. "I'm going to end this." He let her go. He went to the bureau. He pulled out the box. He took out the gun belt. Clara watched, her eyes wide with a new terror. What are you doing?" "Stopping it," he said. He strapped the belt on. It looked like it belonged there. He was no longer the quiet homesteader. He was the marshal. "Silas, no, don't go there. Don't face him. Not for me." He walked to her. He put his hands on her face. "For you," he said. "For me. For this." He nodded at the cabin, at the curtain, at the life they had started to build. "I am not running, and neither are you. Now, bar the door. And use the pistol if you have to." He turned, and he was gone. The door closed, and she heard the bar drop. On his side, he had locked her in. No, she ran to the door. It was barred from the outside. He had locked her in, to keep her safe, to keep her from running. She heard the horse. She ran to the window, and she saw him, a dark, righteous shadow, riding hard for Drybone in the pale moonlight. Silas rode into town as the sun was just beginning to taint the eastern sky. The Golden Spur was still lit. A light was on. He didn't hitch his horse. He swung down. He walked to the door. He kicked it open. The room was a mess. 3 men were at a table, playing cards. A sleepy-eyed bartender was behind the bar. They all froze. Silas stood in the doorway, the morning light at his back, making him a tall, black silhouette. His hand was on his pistol. "Which one of you is the talker?" he said. The men looked at each other. One of them, a thin man with a weasel's face, slowly raised his hand. Silas walked to him. He was not in a hurry. He stopped in front of the table. "I have a message," Silas said, his voice a low, cold rumble. "For Jeb Rayner." The man's eyes went wide. "You tell him Clara is here, my land. You tell him she is under my protection." He leaned in, his voice dropping. "You tell him, if he, or any man in his pay, rides within 5 miles of my property, I will hunt them down, one by one, and I will put them in the ground. You tell him he can ask about me. You tell him to ask, in Leadville, about the man who settled the Harris account." The man's face went pale. He knew the name, the story. "Do you understand me?" The man nodded, his head bobbing. Yes, sir, I understand." "Good." Silas turned. He walked out of the saloon. He mounted his horse. But he knew, as he rode back to the cabin, that he had not finished it. He had only started it. The man in the saloon watched him go. He waited a beat. Then he ran to the back room. "He's here," the man panted. "The marshal. He's got her. And he knows we're here." The threat was delivered. The fuse was lit. The gang knew Clara was alive, and she was not far. When Silas returned, the sun was a red wound on the horizon. He unbarred the door. Clara was standing in the middle of the room, her back to the wall, her hands clenched. She had not moved. She had been his prisoner for 2 hours. "You're back," she whispered. It was not a question. It was an accusation. "I'm back," he said. He dropped the bar. The sound was a heavy finality. "I locked you in. I know. It was to keep you safe, to keep you from running." "I know," she said, her voice a little stronger. Did you see him?" "He's not there. Not yet." Silas unbuckled his gun belt and hung it on the peg. The weight of it was gone, but the room was still heavy. "It's his gang. They're waiting." "I gave them a message." What message? That you're mine, he said. He walked to her. He did not touch her. That I will kill any man who comes for you. Clara looked at the floor. He had declared war. For her. A man had finally stood up for her. It was not a feeling of relief. It was a cold, sharp terror. He will come, she said, her voice flat. A message like that. He won't send his men. He'll come himself. He has to. His pride. He will kill you to prove I belong to him. Then he will try, Silas said. He looked at her, and the hunter was gone. The weary man was back. But I cannot do it alone. Clara, I cannot watch the door and the window and the stable and watch my back all at once. I am not running, and I am not letting you run. He was asking. He was not commanding. Clara looked at his face. She saw the exhaustion. She saw the fear, not for himself, but for her. She saw the ironclad will, and she saw the question. She stood up straight. The gaunt, starved woman was gone. The terrified, running woman was gone. Show me again, she said. He blinked. Show you what? The pistol. She pointed to the mantel. You showed me once how to load, how to fire. I wasn't listening. I was thinking of other things. He stared at her. A slow, quiet respect dawned in his eyes. He had offered her a choice, and she had not chosen to run. She had chosen to stay. She had chosen to fight. All right, he said. The next 2 days were not days of love. They were days of war. The small, curtained cabin became a fortress. The homestead became a battlefield. First, the pistol. He took her out behind the stable, where the rock wall would catch the bullets. He put the small, pearl-handled .32 in her hand. It was heavy. It's not a man's gun, he said. It's a pocket gun. It's for close work. It kicks. Don't be afraid of it. He showed her how to load the cartridges. He showed her how to hold it. Two-handed, her arms braced. Don't aim for the head, he said, his voice flat and practical. You'll miss, you'll panic. Aim for the belly. A man's belly. It's a big target. You won't miss. You pull the trigger, and you keep pulling it until it's empty. She fired. The sound was sharp, a crack that echoed off the rocks. The gun jumped in her hands, and the bullet went wide, kicking up dust 10 feet away. She cried out, her hands tingling. Again, he said, his voice calm. She fired again, and again. She shot at a tin can he placed on a rock. She missed, and then she hit it. The can flew into the air. Good, he said. Again. She practiced until her arms ached and her ears rang. She practiced until she could load the pistol in the dark, her fingers finding the cartridges, the chambers. By feel alone. He will taunt you, Silas said, as they sat cleaning the weapons that night, the firelight gleaming on the oiled metal. He will say things, to make you shake, to make you miss. Clara looked at the small pistol in her lap. He has been taunting me for 5 years. Silas, I am done shaking. They fortified the cabin. It was a fool's errand. In a way, a wooden box against armed men. But it was their wooden box. Silas boarded up half the window. He left a small, 6-inch gap, just enough to shoot through. It's a kill hole, he said. They'll see the curtain. They'll think it's a home. They won't see the gun. He brought in buckets of water from the pump, filling the big cistern by the hearth. He brought in feed for the horse. He barred the stable door from the inside. The horse? Clara asked, her voice tight. Will they? They'll shoot the horse, Silas said, his voice brutal with truth. First thing, to keep us from running. The roan stays in the stable. It's a risk, but he's earned a fighting chance. They worked side by side. They moved the heavy table against the wall, under the window, a platform to shoot from. They moved the bureau to block the door, a second barricade. The cabin was no longer a home. It was a trap. They spoke little. Every word was about the task. More water. Hand me the hammer. The floorboard by the fire. It's loose. We can hide the extra ammunition there. The waiting was the worst part. The sun rose, and it was a judgment. The sun set, and the darkness was a threat. Every gust of wind was a footfall. Every skitter of a lizard on the roof was the scrape of a boot. On the third night, the moon was a high, cold silver coin. The world was lit in shades of white and black. Neither of them could sleep. Silas sat at the table, his rifle across his lap, his back to the wall, watching the door. Clara sat on the cot, her knees drawn up, the pistol in her lap. "You should sleep," he said, his voice a low rumble. "So should you." "He'll come before dawn," Silas said. "That's his way. That's how these men think. They'll ride in with the dark at their back, and the sun in our eyes." The silence stretched. "I am afraid," Clara whispered. He looked at her. His face was a mask of shadows and hard lines. "So am I." Not of him," she said, trying to find the words. "Not of dying. I am afraid. Of losing this. Of losing—" She couldn't say it. She stood up. She walked to him, her bare feet silent on the floor. She was wearing the thin linen chemise. She stood in front of him. He looked up at her. "Silas," she said, "I do not want to die. Without—" He understood. He laid the rifle on the table. He stood up. He did not touch her. He just looked at her, his eyes a question. "This is not," she said, her voice shaking, "payment. This is not gratitude. This is my choice." She took his hand. She led him to the cot. Their lovemaking was not the slow, reverent healing of the first time. It was not the tender promise. It was fierce. It was desperate. It was a denial of death. It was two people, in the shadow of the end, clinging to the only life they had, which was each other. It was a battle. It was a claim. His hands were on her, his mouth on her, not as a hunter, not as an owner, but as a man who was drowning, and she was his only heir. She met him. She was not passive. She was not a victim. She held him. She clawed at his back. She took him, as much as he took her. It was a storm. It was a fire. It was the only thing in the world that was real, in a cabin that was waiting for death. After, they lay tangled, their bodies slick with sweat, their breathing ragged. The cabin was silent, save for their hearts. She lay with her head on his chest. She could feel his heart, pounding like a war drum. "Silas," she whispered, her throat raw. I love you." The words, they were out. She had said them. She had never said them to any man, not and meant them. His body went utterly still. The heart under her ear. It stopped. Then it began to pound. Harder, faster. He made a sound. It was a choked, broken sound, deep in his chest. He rolled her, so fast it scared her, pinning her beneath him, his hands on either side of her head. He was not angry. He was— She could not see his face in the dark, but she felt a tremor run through his entire body. A single, hot drop of water hit her cheek. He was weeping. This hard, silent, violent man was weeping. "Don't," he whispered. "Clara, don't say that." "It's true," she said, her own tears starting. "I love you. You put the ring back on my finger. You saw me. I— He couldn't speak. He buried his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking. I didn't think I deserved to hear that again." He held her. He just held her. The hunter, the marshal, the killer. He was gone. It was just a man who was as broken as she was. A man who carried the ghost of his sister, and the ghosts of all the men he had killed. "I didn't save Ilara," he whispered into her hair. I was too late. I've always been too late." "You weren't too late for me," she wept, her arms clinging to him. "You were just in time." They held each other in the dark, and in that shared, broken confession, they found a strength that was greater than any wall, any gun. The sound came 3 hours later. It was a sound so faint, Clara thought she had dreamed it. A single, soft thud. Silas was out of the cot. his gun belt in his hand, before she had even processed it. "What?" she whispered. He put a finger to his lips. He was at the window, at the small, dark crack. He peered out. "Stable," he whispered. The thud. The horse. They had killed the roan. Clara's stomach turned to ice. She was on her feet, the pistol in her hand. Her hands were not shaking. "Get to the window," Silas whispered. He was at the door, his rifle in his hand. "He'll send 2 men to the back, 3 to the front. He always splits them." "How do you know?" "Because that's what I would do." Another sound. A man's voice, low and drunk. "I tell you, Jeb, I don't see." "Shh." They were close. A shadow moved past the window. Clara's heart was in her throat. She raised the pistol. A voice, high and taunting, came from the darkness. "Clara! Oh, Clara! Honey, you in there? Your husband is here. Come on out and give old Jeb a kiss." It was him, the voice from her nightmares, the voice that had whispered filth in her ear while he... She began to shake. "Clara!" Silas's voice, low, hard, calm. "Clara, look at me!" She tore her eyes from the window. He was by the door. He was not looking at the door. He was looking at her. "You are not his," he said. "You are not ruined. You are not unclean. You are mine, now. Hold the gun steady. Aim for the belly." His calm washed over her. She turned back to the window. Her hands were steady. "I'm gonna burn it," Jeb's voice shouted, closer now. "Burn you out, you whore, you and the Tin Star bastard you're hiding with. Now!" Silas whispered. A shot exploded from the door. Silas had fired. A scream. A man's scream. High and short. "I'm hit! Jed, I'm hit!" "Shut up!" Jeb roared. An explosion of gunfire. The window by Clara shattered, glass spraying the room. She ducked. "Clara!" Silas roared. "The back! 2 men!" She heard it, the sound of a boot on the back wall. They were trying to get in the other window. She ran. She crouched. She saw a shadow. A man's hand, gripping the sill. She remembered. "Aim for the belly. Keep pulling." She stood up. The man was halfway through the window. He saw her. His eyes went wide. She fired. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The gun was empty. The man looked surprised. He looked down at his chest, at the 4. Dark, spreading stains. He fell backward, out of the window, and was silent. "Clara!" Silas screamed. Another man was behind him. She was fumbling with the cartridges, her hands shaking again. The man had a knife. He was on her. A shot from across the room. The man's head exploded. Silas. He had saved her. "Reload!" he yelled. More gunfire. From the front. "There's only one of 'em left," a voice yelled. "It's just the marshal." Silas was at the door hole. 2, he corrected, and fired. A grunt. A body falling. "That's 2, he whispered. It was quiet. Too quiet. "Jeb," a voice called. "Jeb, they're all down. Marty's hit. Cole's dead." "Shut up," Jeb's voice. "I'll do it myself." "Clara," Silas said. "Get behind the cot." "No. Clara, do it." "He's mine," she said. A heavy boot kicked the door. The door held. Another kick. The wood was splintering. "Jeb Rayner," Silas yelled. "This is Marshal Silas. You're alone. Your men are dead. Ride out. Ride out, and I'll let you live." A drunken laugh. "You'll let me live? That's my wife in there. Marshal, my property. I'm coming in to get what's mine." Another kick. The door burst open, the bureau scraping back. A man stood there. He was huge. He was silhouetted against the gray, pre-dawn light. He was bearded, filthy, and he held a shotgun. It was Jeb. His eyes found Clara. "There you are," he grinned, his teeth rotten. "Look at you, playing house. You ruined whore. You think a man like this would want you? A man who's clean. He's just using you, like I did, like every man will. 'Cause you're ruined." Clara looked at him, the man from her nightmares. He was just a man, a fat, drunk, loud man. He was not a monster. He was just a man. "I am not," she said, her voice clear in the quiet room. "Ruined." She raised the pistol. Jeb's eyes widened. He laughed. "You're gonna shoot." Clara shot him. The sound was small, a pop. She hit him in the gut. He looked down, his hand going to his belly. He looked up, his eyes wide with a terrible, sober surprise. He dropped the shotgun. He took a step. He fell to his knees. He looked at her, his mouth working. "Clara," he was still coming. He was on his knees, crawling. You bitch." He was reaching for her. A shot exploded, deafening. Jeb's head snapped back. He fell, face first, onto the floor of the cabin, and was still. Silas stood over him, his rifle smoking, his face a mask of cold, hard granite. He had fired from 2 feet away. He had finished him. It was over. The silence in the cabin was a living thing, the smell of sulfur and blood and death. "Silas," Clara whispered. He turned, and he fell. "No." He was on his knees. His rifle clattered to the floor. His left hand was clamped to his right shoulder. Blood, so much blood, was pouring through his fingers. "Oh, God," she said. "Oh, God, Silas." He had been hit. In the first volley, the shattered glass. He'd been hit, and he had fought. He had killed 2 men. He had saved her. He had finished Jeb, all with a bullet in his shoulder. It's just a..." He grunted, and his eyes rolled back. He collapsed onto his side. No, you don't." Clara was on him. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to save me and die." She ripped his shirt open. The wound was high, on the shoulder, but it was bad. It was dark, and it was pumping. She ran. She grabbed the bottle of whiskey he kept for this. She grabbed the mending kit, the needle, the thread. "Hold on, Silas," she commanded. "You hold on." She ran back. He was pale. His lips were blue. He was bleeding out. "This is gonna hurt," she whispered, her hands trembling so hard she could barely see. I'm sorry. She poured the whiskey over the wound. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound, and his eyes flew open. "Good," she wept. "You stay with me. You stay awake." She threaded the needle. Her hands they wouldn't stop shaking. "Clara," he whispered, his eyes on her. It's all right." "It is not all right," she sobbed. Hold still." She pushed the needle into his skin. He roared. She pulled it through. She was stitching him, like a piece of canvas. Her stitches were huge and ugly and wrong, but they were closing the wound. She was covered in his blood. Her hands were red. The linen chemise was red. She finished. She tied the knot. She tore a strip from the chemise and packed it hard. He was unconscious. She sat on the floor. She lifted his head. She cradled him in her lap, on the floor of their cabin, surrounded by dead men. In the first light of a new, terrible day, his blood was all over her. Her tears were washing it, making pink tracks on his pale, cold face. She rocked him. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her voice a broken, raw thing. "Please, Silas, don't leave me." She looked at her own hand. The ring. His blood was on the ring. You have to wake up," she sobbed, clutching him. I still need you. I still need you to put that ring back on again." The first week was a blur of blood, whiskey, and thin, hot broth. Silas did not die. He hovered in a gray, fevered world between life and death, and Clara was the anchor that kept him from drifting away. She did not sleep. She sat by the cot, a rag in one hand, a tin cup in the other. She dripped water onto his cracked lips. She washed the sweat from his face. She held his hand when the fever dreams came, when he cried out for Alara, when he gripped his rifle and fought battles in his sleep. "I'm here," she would whisper, her voice raw. "I'm here. Silas, you're safe. You're home." The cabin stank of death. On the second day, she had faced a task more horrifying than the shootout. She had to move the bodies. She could not leave them on her floor. She could not ask Silas, who was burning with infection, to breathe that air. She took his rifle. She went outside. The stable was a ruin. The roan was dead. She put her hand on its still warm neck and wept for the animal that had carried her savior. Then she set her jaw. She tied a rope around the ankles of the first man, the one she had shot. She dragged him, her heels digging in, out of the cabin, past the stable, to the rocky rise. She did this 4 times. Jeb, she left for last. She stood over him, the man who had owned her, who had beaten her, who had ruined her. He was just meat, a heavy, lifeless sack of a man. She felt nothing, not hatred, not satisfaction, not fear. She felt only an ending. She tied the rope. She dragged him. He was the heaviest. She left him with the others. She did not bury them. The ground was iron. She had no shovel that would break it, and no strength. She left them for the land. The land was not kind, but it was thorough. The buzzards and the coyotes would do the work she could not. She returned to the cabin. She took buckets of water from the pump. She scrubbed the floor. She scrubbed the blood, his and theirs, from the rough-hewn planks, her hands raw, until the lye soap took the skin from her knuckles. She burned the chemise she had worn. She washed his blood from her skin. Then she went back to his side. He woke, truly woke, on the 7th day. His eyes, no longer filmed with fever, found her. She was asleep in the chair, her head on the edge of his cot, her hand on his chest. He lifted his good arm, his left, and touched her hair. Her eyes flew open. They were red-rimmed, huge in her gaunt face. "Silas," she breathed. "Hey," he whispered. His voice was a dry scratch. "You're a terrible nurse." She stared. My shoulder. Feels like you stitched it with barbed wire." A sound came out of her, a laugh that was a sob. She buried her face in the blankets. You're an awful patient." "Water," he croaked. She gave him water. She propped him up. She fed him a spoonful of thin broth. "The others?" he asked, his eyes going to the door. "Gone," she said. "The roan?" Her face told him. He closed his eyes. "Damn. I'm sorry. Silas. Not your fault." He looked at her. He saw the hollows under her eyes. He saw the raw, red skin of her hands. You stayed." "I told you," she said, her voice fierce. "You still had work to do." The weeks passed. Healing, on the frontier, was not a gentle thing. It was an act of will. Silas's will was strong, but his body was weak. He sat in the chair, wrapped in blankets, while Clara rebuilt their world. She fixed the door. She found new planks in the stable and, using his hammer, she mended the splintered wood. She found a piece of tin and patched the hole in the wall. She could not fix the window, so she hung a blanket over it, turning the cabin into a warm, dim den. She took his pistol. She walked the perimeter of the homestead. Hunting, she was a bad shot, but she was desperate. She brought back 2 rabbits. She made a stew. It was the first real food he had. He watched her. He watched her skin the rabbits, her movements precise. He watched her chop wood, her thin arms swinging the axe. He saw a woman who was no longer a victim. He saw a woman made of the same iron as the land. "You're a wonder, Clara," he said one evening, his voice stronger. She stopped, the ladle in her hand. "I'm just surviving." "No," he said, holding her gaze. "You're living." After a month, he was strong enough to ride. He had to. They needed supplies. He took her horse, a small, scrubby Mustang she had found wandering, a survivor of the gang. He rode to Drybone. Clara barred the door. She sat with the rifle. The fear was not gone. It was just a companion now. Silas rode into town. He was a ghost. He was thin, his shoulders stiff, his face pale. The town, which had heard the gunfire echo from the hills a month before, stopped. Old Man Hesh was on the mercantile porch. He saw Silas. He saw the empty saddle of the big roan. He saw the way Silas moved his right arm. "So," Hesh grunted, "it's done. It's done." Silas said, "The news had already arrived. The drifter had seen the bodies on the hill. The town of Drybone was awash in rumors. Some, like the respectable women, the ones with the clean aprons, whispered that she was cursed, a Jezebel, a woman who brought death. They pulled their skirts tight when Silas passed, as if he carried the taint of her. That woman, they'd say, ought to be run out. She brought those men. She'll bring more. Others, the men at the saloon, the ones who knew what a man like Jeb Rayner was, they looked at Silas with a new respect. Heard she shot him. A blacksmith muttered over a beer. Heard she shot him right in the gut, and the marshal, he finished it. That's some sand, another said. For a woman. Not just a woman, Hesh said, from his corner. That's his woman, and she's got more steel than this whole damn town. Silas ignored them all. He bought his coffee, his flour, his salt. He bought a small pane of glass. He bought 2 fat chickens, already butchered. And he bought a small, leather-bound book with a pencil. He rode home. He gave her the supplies. He gave her the glass for the window. He gave her the chickens. And then he gave her the book. She stared at it. What's this? For your thoughts, he said, clumsy. You have a lot of 'em. Seemed like you might want a place to put 'em. She took the book. She held it to her chest. No one had ever thought of her thoughts. That night, she opened it. The pages were clean, white, and full of promise. She wrote, "My name is Clara. I was born in Illinois. I was sold for 2 mules. I was a wife, but I was not a woman." She stopped. She looked at Silas, who was reading a month-old newspaper. She looked at the new glass in her window. She wrote, "Today, my husband brought me a book. Life settled. It settled like the dust, into a new, hard-packed shape. The land was still harsh. The wind was still cold, but the cabin was warm. It was a home." One afternoon, a wagon creaked up the rise. Silas was out of the door, his pistol in his hand. Before the man had even stopped, Clara was at the window, her rifle steady. It was a traveling preacher, a thin, tired man with kind eyes and a dusty coat. "Peace," the preacher called, his hands high. I am Brother Amos. I mean no harm. I am just thirsty." Silas lowered the gun, but he did not holster it. "Water's at the pump, then you move on." Of course, the preacher said. He looked at Clara in the window. He looked at Silas. He saw the new mended door. He had been in Drybone. He knew the story. "I heard," the preacher said, as he drank. "I heard what happened here. A terrible thing, a terrible trial. The Lord works He works." He looked at Clara. "Ma'am, I heard you stood your ground." Clara just watched him. "The women in town," Amos said, They're foolish. They talk, but I see a woman of God's own strength." He looked at Silas. "And I see a man who stands by her." He looked at the ring on her hand. "They say, in town, that you two are living in sin, that you are not proper." Silas stepped forward, his eyes going flat. "Preacher, you're done with your water." "No," the preacher said. "No, son, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I can make it proper. I can marry you, right here, before God, and seal what you two have already forged in fire." Clara's breath caught. "Marry?" Silas looked at her. He saw the look on her face. Was it hope? Was it fear? He turned to the preacher. If she wants it, it's her choice." He looked at Clara. He was offering it. A name. His name. A new life. A clean, proper life. She looked at the preacher. She looked at Silas. She looked at the ring on her hand. The ring Jeb had given her. The ring Silas had bought. The ring she had worn while she killed. She took a breath. She slipped the ring from her finger. Silas's face went white. He thought she was refusing. She stepped forward. She put the old, worn, bloody gold ring into his hand, his left hand. You already married me, she said, her voice soft, but so clear it cut through the wind. You married me the day you bought this for $10. You married me the day you told me I was not unclean. You married me the day you let me stay. She closed his fingers over the ring. But I will take your name, if you will have me. Silas's eyes, they were full. He looked at her, this small, strong woman. He nodded, unable to speak. They were not married in a church. There was no white dress. There was no music. Brother Amos stood in a field of tall, dry grass behind the cabin. The sun was low, turning the world to gold and honey. Clara wore her clean, mended calico dress. Her hair was brushed, and it shined in the light. Silas wore his clean shirt. His hair was combed. He was shaved. He looked like a different man. We are gathered, Amos said, his voice quiet, in the sight of God, to join this man, Silas, and this woman, Clara. He spoke the words. They were old words, words of honor, cherish, protect. Silas's voice was a low rumble. I will. Clara's voice was a clear, steady note. I will. The ring, Amos said. Silas opened his hand. He looked at the ring, the symbol of her old, broken life. This, Amos faltered. This is her old... It's her past, Silas said, his voice rough. And it's her future. It's our future. It's the price I paid. And it's the price she paid. It's the only ring that matters. He took her left hand. His hand was not trembling. It was steady. And Silas, the man who had bought her ring not to own it, but to return it, he gently, tenderly, placed it back on her finger. I marry you, he said, not to the preacher, but to her. I marry you, Clara, with this, with my name, with my life. I marry you, she whispered, her eyes full of tears. With all that I am, with all that I have left, the preacher said. I pronounce you man and wife. Silas did not wait. He framed her face, and he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was not a kiss of desperation. It was a kiss of peace, a kiss of arrival. They were married. That night, under a sky so full of stars it looked like spilled diamonds. They laid a blanket in the tall grass. The preacher was gone. The world was theirs. He made love to his wife. It was tender. It was unhurried. It was joyful. There were no ghosts. There was no shame. There was no guilt. The shadows had been burned away. He touched her as if she were made of the light. He kissed her skin, her scars, her hands. He whispered her name. Her new name, Mrs. Clara. He did not have a last name. He was just Silas. She was just Clara, and she was not afraid. She was open. She was happy. It was a word she had not known. She laughed, a soft, breathless sound in the dark. He kissed her laugh. It was a new beginning. Clara began to write in her journal every night. She wrote, October. We have been married for 2 weeks. Silas is building a new stable. I am mending his old shirt, the one I cut to stitch him. It feels good to mend something, instead of just surviving it. She wrote, November, the first snow. It is cold, but the cabin is warm. Silas brought me a small, gray kitten from town. He said he found it. I think he paid $5 for it. I have named it Hesh. She wrote, December. I am thinking of the spring. I am thinking of a garden. Silas says the ground is hard. I told him, so am I. And one night, she wrote about the beginning. I remember the day I walked into Drybone. I was barefoot. I was starving. I had one thing left to sell, my soul. It was in the shape of a gold ring. I was ready to sell it for bread. A cowboy bought it. He was a hard man, a quiet man. He bought my past. He bought my shame. He paid $10 for it, and then he gave it back to me. He put it back on my finger. He said I shouldn't have to sell my past just to eat. He taught me. He taught me I was not for sale. He taught me I was worth more than any price. They lived. It was not an easy life. The winters were brutal. The summers were scorching. The land was an enemy as much as it was a home, but they faced it. They lived simply, hand in hand. They were two scarred, broken people. He with the ghosts of his past, she with the memory of hers. But they were not broken. Not anymore. They were whole. They had made a new, whole thing, together. The final image. It is morning. Years have passed. The cabin is still there. It is stronger. The stable is new, and a horse, a young buckskin, waits inside. There is a garden, fenced and green. The sun is rising. It is a fire, a promise, a harsh, beautiful light over a harsh, beautiful land. Clara and Silas stand at the door. They are not young. The lines are deeper on his face. Her hair has strands of silver. She holds a cup of coffee. He stands behind her. His good arm, his left, around her waist. His right arm, the one with the ugly, puckered scar on the shoulder, rests on her hand. She sips. He leans down. He does not kiss her mouth. He does not kiss her cheek. He turns her hand over, the one with the old, worn, simple gold band, and he kisses the ring. Thank you so much for listening to this story. My name is, well, I'm just an old hand, but I'm glad you spent the time with me and with Clara and Silas. Their kind of story. It's a hard one, but it's a true one. I'd love to know what you thought. If you're out there, listening, please feel free to leave a comment. Tell me where in this wide, wild world you're tuning in from. If you enjoyed this, I'd be mighty obliged if you'd subscribe to From Wild West. We've got a lot more stories to tell. Let me know your thoughts in English. And until next time, keep your back to the wind and your eyes on the horizon.